My cancellation was not so much for my science or my perspective as because I dared to criticize the IPCC and the important people. But then I realized so many of these scientists, they were just really behaving like activists. They weren't behaving like scientists anymore. They were just pushing this agenda.
Today's guest is Judith Curry. She's a top climatologist, former chair at Georgia Tech, and has testified before the U.S. Congress many times. She became well known for questioning parts of the climate consensus and was even banned from some scientific circles for her views, which made her a major controversial voice in the climate debate.
Africa has 19% of the global population, and they have 4% of the global CO2 emissions. Even if you were to double your energy, it wouldn't make a dent in the global CO2 emissions. The whole idea of net zero, I mean, it's not happening. Since the end of the 19th century, we've warmed by 1.3 degrees centigrade. On a per capita basis, 2 orders of magnitude fewer people die from extreme weather and climate events. Wind and solar just aren't going to cut it. You need good dispatchable energy sources like nuclear, gas, coal, things like that. Even if we were successful at reaching net zero by 2050, it wouldn't change the climate. There is one thing that we could do to advance humankind in the 21st century would be to
Judith, thank you so much for joining me today. I've been looking forward to this conversation. As you know, the energy and the climate alarmism is definitely at the top of my mind, especially because I'm trying, working very hard to build prosperity in Africa. But before we get into the issues, as it relates to Africa, the climate and the energy, all of that, I would love for you to be able to share with our audience how you actually used to be a mainstream climate scientist, and then what happened and why you have been, in a way, canceled. Would love for you to walk us through that.
I've always been interested in the environmental and earth sciences, even as a young kid. And I eventually got my PhD in geophysical sciences from the University of Chicago. And I was focusing more on atmospheric science and particularly the Arctic and also sea ice. Okay. And so was my main topic. And I got my PhD in the early 1980s. And this was before global warming was really much of a thing. But when global warming did become a thing, increasingly in the 1990s, my expertise in the Arctic region, became a focal point. Because the Arctic was regarded as the bellwether of warming because, things were melting faster up there. And I got involved in, the climate change research, an issue. I totally stayed out of the public debate and politics and everything. But that all changed in 2005. I had co-authored a paper that assembled a global data set on hurricanes. And since 1970, which was a satellite era, and we found the rather startling result that the percent of category 4 and 5 hurricanes had doubled since 1970. And this paper was published through a total freak of coincidence 2 weeks after Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans. So this became a huge focusing event for global warming. The hurricanes are going to get worse, and on it goes. And I got sort of a huge amount of publicity. I got caught up in the public debate. And at the time, I thought it was the responsible thing to support the consensus, on the broader issues. But then I realized that so many of these scientists, they were just really behaving like activists. They weren't behaving like scientists anymore. And they were just pushing this agenda. And all of a sudden, I was queen for a day, because my paper was so useful to the alarmist agenda. And I started feeling rather uncomfortable about all this. And so after about 6 months of that craziness, I backed off, no more interviews. I'm just getting back to doing my work. But that all changed in November of 2009 when This is the so-called ClimateGate emails, which you may have heard. This was the unauthorized release or hacking of emails from the University of East Anglia of a bunch of IPCC authors and their collaborators. And what I saw just appalled me. Absolutely unprofessional and even unethical behavior by these scientists, trying to keep data away from people that might criticize them, trying to rig the peer review process, get journal editor fires, trying to work around the IPCC procedures to get their preferred findings in, and on it went. And I said, okay, if this is the consensus that I've been supporting, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And I was the only sort of mainstream scientists to speak up and say, I mean, this caused a huge international outrage, but I was the only sort of mainstream kind of scientist to speak up and say, look, we need to do better. We need to make our data publicly available and our methods need to be well documented. We need to stop being overconfident in our findings and we need to talk about the uncertainties. And finally, we need to treat with respect, other scientists who disagree with us. And I thought those were motherhood and apple pie statements that everybody could agree with. No, I became enemy number one, okay, for criticizing the important people, even criticizing the IPCC. So I became enemy number one. And people didn't really know, and I was, not that I wanted it, especially after my previous episode with the hurricanes, but I was getting a lot of publicity. And this greatly concerned, the important people who thought they controlled the narrative and the media. And all of a sudden, here I was getting all this attention and people were listening to me. And so, I was a real thorn in their sides. And the more they tried to attack me and knock me down, I think they thought I would fold quickly because I was a female. I would get upset and cry and, apologize and, let the daddies be in control again. But nope, it just fired me up even more. I was going to fight for what was right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Something you probably know something about. But then they finally, Michael Mann figured out how to take me down. Let's just call her a denier, a climate denier. Let's throw her in the bin with all the crank scientists, the oil companies, and the right-wing media, and just call her a climate denier. Prior to that, they weren't calling, they would use the denier label for certain politicians or media, journalists, but they weren't calling other scientists deniers. But so then they started calling me, and this took off, and then they started calling this whole other list of scientist deniers. And even reputable media outlets, if they were going to mention me, they would start, and well-known climate denier Judith Curry has this to say. And they weren't out to attack me. It's just that was like part of my title, climate denier Judith Curry. Okay, and so, well, all this put me in hot water at my university, which was Georgia Tech. Some of the alarmists, faculty members saying, oh, she's preventing us from getting funding and she makes us look bad and the donors aren't going to, and this, that, and the other. And so, it became clear that, this was not good for Georgia Tech. And it became clear to me that I was completely unemployable by other universities. If you were to Google Judith Curry, you would see Judith Curry, climate heretic, Judith Curry, serial climate disinformer. Nobody's going to hire me, with that kind of profile. So I said, I could have stuck around for a while and, they done nothing and sucked up my big salary for a while because I was tenured, but that's not who I am. So I just left, and I had started a company a few years earlier, Climate Forecast Applications Network. Georgia Tech had actually encouraged me to start that company. And so then I just said, okay, I'm just going to do this full time. So I went private sector, and this was so liberating. I didn't have to worry about what anybody think. I'm working with clients, mostly in business, but also in government, who need to know the real risks, not the hype that is put out there just because people think that all this hype and alarmism is going to make people stop burning fossil fuels any more quickly, which it obviously hasn't. So, that's basically the story. So now, um, and my cancellation was not so much for my science or my perspective, is because I dared to criticize the IPCC and the important people. Okay, that's basically why I was canceled. There are people with, similar scientific perspectives on global warming, and they don't get canceled because they don't speak out and criticizing the activism and the unprofessional behavior and all that. And I called that out, especially on my blog. In 2010, I started a blog, Climate, Etc., and I started digging into all these uncomfortable issues, not just the science, but, the politics of science, the social psychology of climate science, all these kind of issues, pointing out, look what's going on here. And, this really riled up the so-called establishment. And that's how I became, enemy number one to the alarmist wing of the climate scientists.
And I think you became even more dangerous because you definitely are among the most you know um, reputable scientists and the climate scientists, serious ones. So someone like you speaking out actually was big danger to them. I guess that's why
Yeah,
you had so
right.
much
I
vitriol.
mean, my publication, my journal publications and my book publications would stand up against anyone's. And also, prior to this, I had been on many, many national and international advisory committees,
Yeah,
so I had, some stature from that. And then, boom.
yeah,
You
yeah. We
know?
can't afford we can't afford someone as big as Judith going against us, huh? I think that's what you paid for. The Magatweight Show is brought to you by Skin is Skin. Skin is Skin is a premium assortment of skin and lip therapy products manufactured with natural ingredients originated in Africa. I founded Skin is Skin in an effort to create jobs, prosperity, and provide a greater sense of dignity for my beloved Senegal. Skin is Skin is an African product made in Africa by Africans, bringing money and capital into African economies through value creation. Purchasing African products made in Africa by Africans is what Africa needs to thrive. Visit skiniskin.com and discover our products. Now, as you know, many people who say that they're concerned about climate change, their whole strategy about that is let us get to net zero by 2050. What do you think about that, Judith?
Okay. Well, first off, it's not justified by the science because there's still so much uncertainty in basic things like how much warming will doubling carbon dioxide cause. There's a factor of 3 uncertainty that's even acknowledged in the IPCC reports. We don't have a sufficiently adequate understanding of natural climate variability. That has all been dismissed. The climate scientists have been using these extreme emissions scenarios to drive the climate models and to produce all these extreme outcomes. So we simply did not have a very well justified basis for this. And the weakest part of the argument is warming dangerous? Moderate amounts of warming aren't particularly dangerous. For example, since the end of the 19th century, we've warmed by 1.3 degrees centigrade. In that time, population has increased substantially. Agricultural productivity has increased substantially. We're on a per capita basis, 2 orders of magnitude fewer people die from extreme weather and climate events. So, for the first 1.3 degrees of warming, we've done pretty well. So why are we thinking that warming is dangerous beyond what humans can adapt to? And it's only dangerous if you look at these extreme emission scenarios and you're talking about 4 to 5 degrees centigrade of warming, on the time frame of a century. I mean, if that were to occur, I agree that would likely be very dangerous, but there's no justification. I mean, the extreme emission scenarios are implausible. The climate models have even been acknowledged by the recent IPCC assessment report that many of them are running too hot. There's this huge uncertainty in the climate sensitivity to increasing CO2. So, and people say, well, we should do it as a precaution, just in case. Yeah, well, in that case, the cure is worse than the disease because, we need energy. This is how we have prospered in the 20th and the early 21st century, with abundant energy. And we need more energy. We need to obviously electrify Africa, but
Yep.
even in the developed world, we need more energy really for all the advances we want, artificial intelligence and blockchain and robotics and data centers and all these things are eating up a huge amount of electricity. So we just need more electricity, like way more electricity to move the human race forward in the 21st century. And
That's
attempting to reduce energy consumption and get rid of tried and true, power sources like natural gas and coal and even nuclear. I mean, the advocates, sometimes I think they hate nuclear worse than they hate fossil fuels. I mean, it's crazy. I think they just hate people.
yeah. You
That's
start to
all you,
wonder.
yeah, they hate people. So,
Yeah.
we need more energy. And in the short term, that's going to be fossil fuels. I mean, wind and solar just aren't going to cut it. I mean, I think there's a role for rooftop solar, just for households and things like that. But you certainly can't run an industrial economy or a significant economy on wind and solar. You need good dispatchable energy sources like nuclear, gas, coal, things like that. So, the whole idea of net zero, I mean, it's not happening. It's not only is it economically infeasible, it's technologically infeasible, and it's politically impossible. Okay, there's a few countries in Europe who are pushing hard. There's a few countries that have abundant hydropower or geothermal, and they've managed to pull it off. But for, 95% of the places, you have to rely on producing energy from right now it's coal, gas, or nuclear. There may be other things coming down the pike, advanced geothermal, and who knows what else. But for the next, few decades, we know what the power sources have to look like. And trying to strangle all that is just insane. It's going to cause so many problems. It already is. I mean, Europe has destroyed their economy. I mean, they have no industry anymore in Europe.
Yes.
I mean, it's just nuts, especially Germany. I mean,
Yeah.
France is okay because they invested in a lot of nuclear.
Nuclear prior. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So, but the ones, I mean, a lot of them have, just pretty much gotten rid of nuclear. The good news is a couple countries in Europe are now bringing back nuclear, and that's in a good direction. But it's just a bunch of insanity. And 10 years ago, climate change and this fossil fueled warming was at the top of the international agenda. And then COVID hit, and people realized that maybe we have bigger problems to worry about. And then these war break out, and then we say, "Oh yeah, we have these other problems." And people are starting. It was a quiet time, like 2010 to 2020, and people could afford to worry about all these obscure, esoteric environmental issues. But then when real problems emerge, all that stuff goes to the back burner.
yeah.
Um, and in the US, we've had a fairly seismic political change in the last few months with the election of Donald Trump. And, he's like getting rid of all this like climate change stuff and all the regulations and everything like that. And you don't hear much resistance. Once, from the scientists and the activists, now that they figure out, okay, it looks like game over. The money's not going to be rolling in anymore. Maybe we need to go worry about something else.
Do you really
Like
think it is
some
over, though? Do you think it is over, though, Judith? Do you really think it is? Do
Oh,
you
it's
think that?
not over. Just in the
Yeah,
U.S. Just in the
yeah,
U.S. There's a big
yeah.
change in the U.S. In the
Hmm.
Europe, no, it's still running strong.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but in some of the developed countries, and they say the U.S. backing off, then that gives them license to back off. It's still really running strong in Europe,
Yeah.
okay, and a few other places. But in the
And
U.S., the change has been seismic.
yeah, no, for sure. Good things are happening right now. But when you were saying some other countries like in Europe, I would add in that the Africa, the continent, because the Europeans are committing suicide. It's on their own dime, right? It's them making decisions for themselves about themselves. But the issue we have in Africa is that it's other people making decisions for us, insofar as we usually need, financing to build, energy infrastructure, like these different pipelines for various, whether it's for oil, gas, or anything like that. We obviously need again to contract loans, but all the way from Paris, Tokyo, and places like that, the consensus so far has been and remains: we do not fund fossil fuel infrastructure related projects in Africa. So, us, I think many people in Africa see the nonsense, side of all of this. We see it, yet unlike China
Live
and
it.
India, yeah, unlike China and India, we don't, because we have not managed to develop our economies to the point where we can be truly sovereign and make decisions for ourselves. We are, unlike them, we have to basically go by what the West says on these issues. And so far, right now, we are part of those places that are victims of the climate alarmism, activist and craziness, in the sense that, and that helped with ESGs, the ESG rules. Then here we are, we have oil, we have gas, and all those, but hey, we're not allowed to tap into it simply because the funding to make it happen is being withheld all the way from the West again. So, what are your thoughts on that? I mean,
Well,
how do you feel about all of that?
it's absolutely unethical and immoral. I mean, it's even worse. It's your fossil fuel resources are being sent to Europe and Asia to fund their high
Yeah,
energy lifestyles. I mean,
yeah,
to me, that is just reprehensible. Look, Africa has 19% of the global population,
yeah.
and they have 4% of the global CO2 emissions. And half of those are related to land use and agriculture. It's not
That's right.
even stuff that you should debit against people.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're contributing a tiny bit to the CO2 footprint.
That's
And
right.
even if you were to double, your energy infrastructure, it still wouldn't even, in your CO2 emissions, it wouldn't even make a dent in the global CO2 emissions. And it would have such a huge humanitarian impact. So, it's beyond all sense. It's just, well, the words that have been used, green colonialism, energy apartheid, all those things I think are very apt, is absolutely unethical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, I mean, how to change this? I mean, I think China is supporting some development in Africa,
Yeah.
which is good. I don't know what the U.S. I mean, so far, I don't know what U.S. policy is going to be towards Africa under the Trump regime. I don't think that's gotten onto his radar screen yet. But
Mm-hmm.
based on the way he thinks, there would be no reason not for the U.S. not to support all this. He's withdrawn from the Paris Agreement.
Mm-hmm.
But with the big development banks, are mostly European driven.
Yeah.
So that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It's absolutely immoral. And if there is one thing that we could do to advance humankind in the 21st century, it would be to electrify Africa. I mean, this is a huge, huge percent of the world's population. And, and it's not just the energy, it's the agriculture. So if you get these high yield hybrids so that you can, make more of your land, I mean, these are also, for producing crops, these are hybrids that need more fertilizer and they need more water, which means more electricity. So it's not, so the food thing is tied to the energy thing as well. If you can, and if you could irrigate certain regions and if you could produce your own fertilizer, that would be a huge boon, okay, to your economy and security. It seems overwhelming. I've talked to some companies in Africa that are trying to spin up some insurance in Africa, like crop insurance and natural disaster insurance. And my company has done some of that helping in India, but it's easier once you're at a certain threshold for that to happen. And Africa is not quite at that threshold for that to happen. But once they get to that threshold, and then you get some insurance going, and then that makes things much less volatile in terms of, your agriculture and things like that. So it seems like there are some relatively basic things that could be done, but, the development banks just have other I just can't understand how they can think this way. And I think these targets, even the Europeans are starting to realize that this net zero in 2050 is not going to happen. And once they really realize that, maybe they'll come to reality about, well, what should we be doing in the meantime that's not really tied to meeting these targets? Because, all of the development aid that used to go to, reducing poverty and reducing vulnerability to extreme weather, all of that's been redirected into wind and solar. I mean, that's not helping you very much. Maybe rooftop solar is helping households a little bit, but it's not really helping you develop your economy. No. So it's a bad situation. And maybe once things, there's too many wars right now that's consuming people's attention in the foreign policy world. Maybe once that dies down, we can get back to human development.
I have very little hopes that that's going to happen. And frankly, it's about time, because Africa, we Africans have just been put to sleep by all of this aid and all of this development aid. I feel like we should have faced the music much earlier, which would have forced us to take the steps we needed to take.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Just the kind of aid that you've been giving does more harm than good. What you need is to promote economic development and help you. Okay, once you have energy, you can do it the rest of it yourself. Okay, so the energy is the roadblock. So you don't want all that meddling. What you want is energy infrastructure. Once you have that, you can do the rest of it yourself.
Yeah. No, we're totally in agreement. For me, it's not only the energy infrastructure, but it's also the economic freedom. So have plenty, abundant, affordable, reliable energy, together with an environment where entrepreneurs can actually enterprise. And then if you have that, get out of the way. It will all happen.
There are governance issues in many of the African countries. And that's a tough one.
Exactly.
But once you have more resources, I think some of that goes away. Yeah,
exactly. And so, Judith, that's always my question. Given all of this, to me, it's really not rocket science. So therefore, I'm always sitting there and wondering why there are so many people in the so-called progressive community. And I single them out because they're the ones who have established themselves to be, and they're self-called those who care. They establish themselves as those who care about Africans, about those who care about Black people. Africa being home to 90% of a representative of a Black skin color, you would think that these people would understand that the best way to champion, prosperity and flourishing within the Black community and Africans would be to actually support this access to affordable, reliable, and energy. Yet it's a complete opposite. So what do you think is going on here? What I mean, I'm sure you've had to ask yourself
Oh,
these
okay.
questions.
Well, this goes back. People ask me, like, how do we get to this place where it's just nuts. Well, there's a worldview out there, typified by the World Economic Forum. They want power. It's a globalist agenda. They think there's too many people. Okay. And this goes back to the 1950s, really, with the Rockefeller Foundation and the Rothschilds and all of these people developing this worldview, like third or fourth generations from these big fortunes. And the UN Environmental Program in the 1980s, again, they were very hated fossil fuels, very anti-capitalist, and sometimes even anti-democracy. And this was when this sort of globalist agenda was really put in place. And they viewed environmental issues and also public health issues as ways to, do this non-governmental world control. I mean, and there's all sorts of documents on that. If you go back and look at all the documents from the World Economic Forum, you can see all this. And at the end of the day, they hate people. They think there's too many people. And
Yes, Malthusian, but Malthusian view of the world is still here.
yeah, yeah, and it's anti-human, and it's a worldview that was somehow marketed as being virtuous, saving the planet. The planet's going to do just fine. Okay, what we need to worry about is people. We don't want to trash our environment. We need to take care of our environment so that it provides us with the ecosystem services we need. But at the end of the day, the priority should be people.
Yeah.
Okay, not this, hunk of rock that's been here for 4.6 billion years and will probably be around for, another few more. But the planet's going to be fine. It's the humans that we have to worry about. And I don't know. It's just a worldview that has somehow, taken over much of the UN and certainly the World Economic Forum, and some of these World Health Organization is really going off the deep end. And it's, at the end of the day, it's this view, and it's of, too many people. The environmental is fragile, but at the end of the day, it's about power. Okay, and I just think it's very ugly, and we need to fight against this. And I know how challenging it is in Africa to fight against this without, the resources and without the infrastructure, because Africa is the main victim right now.
No, it is. And the good news is people are fighting back. We are definitely fighting back. And I don't know if you've been following what's been going on recently, but Scott Tinker, together with Toby Rice, basically have come together to create what's called Energy Corp. So Energy Corp. And the plan there is that by 50 years from now, so by 2075, they would like to see all people on Earth, so meaning all Africans, get to the point where there's a $50,000 GDP, as well as each person consuming 50 megawatt hour in terms of energy. Because we know that when people have those numbers, we know that this is where they entered prosperity zone. So would you say that happening for Africans by 2075, having a $50,000 GDP in these African nations, people consuming 50 megawatt hour, would you say that would do so much more for Africans than net zero ever would do?
Oh my gosh. Net zero is doing nobody any good. I mean, and the evil little thing here is, even if we were successful at reaching net zero by 2050, it wouldn't change the climate. I mean, it might slow down sea level rise by the 23rd century, but we wouldn't notice any difference in extreme weather events or anything like that. We wouldn't notice the difference. Maybe in the 22nd century, we'd start to notice a difference, but it's not going to help people in the 21st century. And this is this is straightforward interpretation of what the climate models say. And that this isn't, even if you believe the climate models, we're not going to see any benefit from net zero until at least the 22nd century, if ever. I mean, and the time scales in the climate system are so long. I mean, we can't unring the bell, of this increasing carbon dioxide. We're going to see sea level rise continue for another century or two because the oceans and the ice sheets have very long time scales, so even if we stop now, we'll still see some sea level rise from all this. So it's just, we're not helping anything with net zero other than maybe like 2 or 3 centuries in advance. So by
So,
then,
so am I hearing you say, because sometimes I say it and people get freaked out by it because it's so crude, but am I hearing you say that we are sacrificing the lives of people today, like right now? And I
yeah,
think people don't
exactly.
even
That's
know
what
that.
the
It's not,
trade-off.
yeah, and it's not just in Africa. It's also in the Western world. The people
Oh
who are
yeah,
dying.
Central
Yeah,
America. Yeah.
yeah, people dying in Canada also and the UK of cold because the energy bills are so high. People have to choose between heating the room more or putting food on the table. Especially elderly people are suffering the most. But we don't talk about this even in these wealthy nations. So we're sacrificing people today for a hypothetical, oh,
Exactly. And
100
this
years
is
from now.
called, okay, the economists call this the discount rate. I don't know if you've come across this.
It's, yeah, I know, and
Yeah,
it's
the
terrible.
discount
It's,
rate, so it's whether it's, if you have a discount rate 0, that means people in 2100 we should be paying as, to help them out, versus if it's 7, then we should just focus on the people here and now. And so there's this big debate among economists about what the number should be. I said, excuse me, this isn't a debate for economists. This is a moral debate. And the
yeah,
obvious answer is that you support living human beings
yeah.
now, not people, 100 years from now, against a hypothetical danger. I mean, and I use this example, it's sort of US centric, but if you go back, 100 years ago, I mean, well, maybe a little bit more, 120 years ago, before we had cars, we basically horse driven transportation, horse car- carriages and things like that. And the biggest concern, well, oh my gosh, in 100 years, what are we going to do with all the horse poop? It'll be covering all the streets. Okay. And that was how they were worrying about some. Of course, we've moved on many, many generations from that. So the point is, we have no basis for understanding what the technologies, the values, or whatever for people, 100 years in the future. They might decide they like really warm weather or something like that, So it's just stupid for us to be sacrificing people now for hypothetical people, 100 years from now, that we don't even know what the natural climate is going to vary. We don't know what their technologies will be. We don't know what their values will be. Um, the point is, if we allow economic development to proceed at the rate that it can, then, everybody can be, you know, secure and prosperous. Um, so that, and they should be able to protect, if we have enough economic development, we can afford to protect ourselves from whatever Mother Nature might throw at us. It'd be trivial. So, I mean, it's stupid and it's unethical. And I don't know what kind of a value system, and it gets hidden, like I say, in all this economic mumbo jumbo, the discount rate. People don't understand what it means. It means sacrificing people now for hypothetical people 100 years from now, living in a completely different world with different technologies, resources, and values. I mean, it's just idiotic.
So the discount rate is killing us. So this is interesting. So now, what do you see going forward? Where are you being hopeful, and where are you being worried as you look
Okay.
ahead and you look forward?
Okay. I'm hopeful that the whole net zero thing is going to fall apart, and it's going to fall off the agenda. I mean, it's fallen off the agenda in the US, and many developing countries, India and China, aren't paying any attention to it. They give it lip service, but they're not paying any real attention to it. China wants clean power. If you've ever
Yeah.
visited Beijing in the winter, I mean, the pollution is just stifling.
Hmm.
The air quality is just horrible. So they need to fix that problem. So burning fossil fuels, so they're building a lot of nuclear power plants. I mean, it's being driven by air quality and public health more so than net zero. And
Hmm.
I think that should be the real driver for
Hmm.
getting off the fossil fuels.
Hmm.
But I think it's falling apart. I mean, the European economies are falling apart. We saw this recent fiasco in Spain and Portugal with the wind and solar power. They have way too much wind and solar power. They don't have enough synchronous power to keep the thing running and keep it stable. And that's one of the main drawbacks of wind, solar, and batteries. Batteries help you with the intermittency, but they don't help you with the synchronicity to keep, for frequency control. And so that illustrates that perfectly. We've seen the same problems in South Australia, which is trying to go all wind and solar. And they're only bailed out by being able to import energy from the coal burners in Victoria, you know. So I mean, it's just the wind and solar. It's just not going to work. And with all these the wind turbines have a lifespan, the blades of like 15 to 20 years, and you have to replace them.
Yeah.
And Texas in the U.S. has this big graveyard of wind turbines.
And they're not recyclable. They
Yeah,
they
they're
do
not
poorly on the.
recyclable. It's like
Yeah.
fiberglass or something.
Hmm.
I mean, not to mention the expense and the land
Yes.
footprint for the
Yes.
turbine. I mean, it just makes no sense. Makes
Yes.
absolutely no sense. Um,
And have you
and
seen them on the highway when you're on the highway and you pass one of those trucks moving just one of those turbines?
oh my
Not
gosh,
the turbine, but just one of the wings. I mean,
it's
you could be
huge.
driving on a highway. You could be driving for a few seconds before, even maybe a minute. I don't know, but something to me that seems long before you go from the beginning of the convoy to the end. One wing.
I know it's crazy. You don't appreciate that when you look up and see them.
No, no.
They're way up there. But when you're passing, I've seen the same thing. I'm just astonished by how huge these things are.
Yeah,
So it's totally bad for the environment and
and the
birds,
birds.
and not only that, but it dries out the farmers don't want them
Yeah, farmers
because
don't want them.
it dries out the farmland, and
Yes,
it
that's right.
changes the nighttime temperatures. It keeps
That's
the
right.
from developing the colder nighttime temperatures, and it messes up your crops. So it's just it's a fiasco. I think there is a role for rooftop solar going forward, but not as powering, just for powering local things and giving people some control,
Hmm.
over their own electricity. But
Hmm.
in terms of for the infrastructure and industry, it has to be
Hmm.
right now. It's really coal,
Hmm.
gas, and nuclear.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
hopefully the new nuclear technology is really exciting, and hopefully this can be made much cheaper and much. In the U.S., there's so many regulatory barriers. Doug Burgum, the new Secretary of the Interior, is trying to work on getting rid of all these roadblocks so we can build a nuclear power plant in 6 years in the U.S. at much less cost rather
Hmm.
than 16 years
Yeah,
with huge costs because of all
yeah.
these regulatory issues that
Burdens, yeah.
don't make sense, particularly for the new generation of nuclear power plants. So
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
that has to be the future. But
Hmm. Hmm.
getting Africa over the hump, it's a tough one.
We're
Once
working
you
on
have
it.
enough electricity, you can take
We're
it
work.
and run with it and do what you need
Yeah,
to do.
yeah.
Um,
We're working on it. We're working on it, and specifically through the creation of these zones that we talked about. I don't know if I told you about these, but these are special economic zones that are basically what they run on. Basically, the secret formula there is secret special economic zones that provide the economic freedom that's lacking, as well as the access to affordable, reliable, and abundant energy sources that's lacking. So we think that from zones like that, we can really help leapfrog and leapfrog ahead on these issues. So that's kind of what we're working on, and I do think there's a role here to play for, the private sector as well as the government in some of these instances. So no, so there are things happening. You're right. Africa should be the biggest. It should be the biggest concern right now, in addition to everything else that we're working on. But I, like you, I'm hopeful that, but yet I don't know. I don't know what's going to replace, because given how much we're dealing with nonsensical people, I just don't know what's going to come next. I don't know if net zero by 2050 being repudiated by and slammed in the face of reality is gonna teach them any lesson. I'm sitting here and wondering, what are they preparing? What are they gonna go for next? Because it doesn't seem to me like I've seen people who truly understood that the math doesn't work, the physics don't work, the reality doesn't work. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen those signs from them. So, which tells me, what and where are they going next? They haven't given up. So what's going to happen next?
Well, again, keep your eye on the World Economic Forum. That's, to me, that's the source and the confluence of most of this craziness. So, see what they're talking about and see what they're up to. Again, Klaus Schwab stepping down, who's,
Yes.
the evil people on the planet, in my opinion, along with George Soros. I don't know if that'll lose some of its juice. But yeah, that's the one to keep an eye on, I think, in terms of what they might be trying to pull off next.
So perhaps I should use my special card there, because every time people complain, they're like, "Oh, don't you know that Megathwaite is one of their agents?" Because I'm a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, and so I'll use this opportunity to tell people who are listening to this episode, know that you don't choose to be one of them. Somehow they decide across the world they're going to come up. At least back in the days, it was 100 names of people that they perceive to be leaders of today and tomorrow. And then eventually you get the phone call. I guess maybe and back then I didn't know anything about World Economic Forum, but I got nominated, so that stays for posterity. It is what it is. I have not really gone to the meetings there. It doesn't mean that I won't go to any of the meetings, but all I'm saying is, over the years, I developed, my own sense of what that whole group is, and I disagree with them on so many fronts. But as they say, it's good to remain close, to certain places.
Well,
If
I mean,
nothing
what
else,
they're
we
up
need to know
to,
what's going on.
yeah, what they're up to, watch out on the health front in terms
Yeah.
of what they're up to. That's what I really don't trust.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's one thing not to have energy. It's another thing to have all this other stuff that can affect your health. So that worries me greatly.
Well, certainly Peter Brabeck, I don't really have a lot of consideration for, and he's the one who's replacing Klaus Schwab for now. Him and I had a debate in Saudi Arabia a few years ago.
Ooh.
He lost that debate, but all of it just to say, thank you. All of it just to say, I'm not confident either. Yeah, so he's not somebody that I would go to sleep and be like, oh, everything is fine. Mm-mm. So we'll see what happens. But we all need to keep our eyes open. So Judith, what are you working on these days? Before we.
Oh my gosh, I'm working on too many things.
A good thing. That's a good.
I'm working on a climate assessment report. That's independent of the UN and IPCC. People will hear more about that in the coming months. My company, again, we focus on extreme weather and climate events and predicting them. Big issue for us is hurricanes. And we're focusing on, longer range predictions and working with electric utilities to reduce their vulnerability. We're looking at the inundation problem. I mean, when you think about hurricanes, you think about winds, but it's a combination of the storm surge, the rainfall, and the river flooding that's causing most of the damage, trying to work with that. And then we do have some small projects in South Asia with trying to support smallholder farmers We have some, non-governmental organizations who organize this and communicate it with the farmers and things like that. And that project comes and goes depending on donor funding. But we were supporting coffee growers in Karnataka in India. And I've talked about with some people, some of these African insurance companies about doing something similar in Africa, where it's delivered by cell phones. The cell phone penetration is growing in Africa.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot more, and so this opens up the chance for communicating this kind of information to
Yes.
support the growers. So I'm optimistic that somebody's going to fund that sometime. So,
Do you have information on that you could share, please, possibly?
I'll email you. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll email you some contacts
Okay.
related to this. And the NGO that we've been working with is Precision Development,
Okay.
who's developed this information systems and the cell phone networks and whatever for growers. I'll send you information on that
Please.
because I would love
Please.
to see that one move forward because that's some low-hanging fruit.
Yes. Sounds
that
like
would,
it.
And now that, and even 4 years ago, when I looked at the cell phone penetration in Africa, and I said, oh, a lot of these countries is pretty borderline. But I just checked not too long
No.
ago, and wow,
Yeah.
it's drastically increased even in the last 4 years.
It
So
has.
this puts you over the hump for being able to do something like this. And I
Exactly.
would love to be a part of that. And I'll send you the name of the companies, insurance type companies that we've been, African development. I can't remember exactly, but
Okay.
I'll send you that
Okay.
contact
Please
information.
do.
Would love to get something going along these lines.
Okay, please do. Yeah, I look forward to your email on that because it sounds like a great project to me. So please do, because I think especially as we walk away from some of these toxic foreign aid and different nonprofit initiatives on the continent that frankly have been wasting our time for the most part, it's good for us to start focusing on things that really make a difference. And I think what you're talking about right here is a great chance that farmers have to mitigate, because if you know ahead, if you have access to the provisions, you can take your measures before it hits.
Yeah, and there's very few weather observations, on the continent. We need to get, there's these new sensors that are very robust. They can be, work without being attended and send their information
Yep.
up through the cell phone network or,
Mhm.
and things like that, that we can actually get better information
Yep.
on the continent that can help produce better forecasts for
Exactly.
farmers and for, severe weather and emergency management.
Exactly.
To me, this
Exactly.
is total low-hanging fruit that,
Yep.
even like $10 million can go a huge way to
That's
making
right.
a big difference.
That's right.
And
That's right.
that's nothing in the aid world. So apart from energy infrastructure, I say Africa needs information. Okay.
Oh, trust me, we Africans complain about it all the time. The lack of data is just staggering. Or
Yeah.
you have to really know where to go get it, but even then, it's not. There's no aggregates.
Right. So, I mean, I would love to help on what I would say the weather and climate side
Okay.
of things.
Okay.
And we have like a framework for how this can work with what we were doing in India. And I would love to apply this to Africa. So
Okay.
I will send you the names of the people that I've been in contact with that maybe we can put something together like this. I think this could make a huge difference.
Yeah, I agree. Judith, is there anything else that you wanted to cover that we haven't covered?
No, I think we've covered a lot of territory, but I think we're going to see things changing. I don't think we're going to see what we saw for the last 10 years. I think we've reached the bifurcation point in the post-COVID era. People realize there's bigger things to worry about than the Donald Trump factor. And, I think we're going to see some change. And, and this whole net zero is running into a reality check.
Exactly. No, it was about time. It was about time. Back in the days, it was easy when this thing felt like it was going to be far away to come up with this nonsense. But now I think the wall is closing in on them. So let us hope that it weeds out those people who cannot be, whose mind we cannot change. I don't know. Maybe they're going to go and focus on something else, but the rest of us are going to have to handle reality. Yeah. Well, Judy, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you on, and I look forward to everybody hearing what you have to say. Your story is a really interesting story, but I'm so glad and so happy that you stood your ground, because it's people like you who, you're the reason why we actually did not stay in the madness. And the reason why things are shifting today is because of what you were willing and had the courage to do decades earlier. And that's the only way us humans can make it. We need for a few people to be courageous when it matters for us to find a way out of it. And that's, in my mind, that's the role you played and keep
Okay.
playing.
Well, thank you again for inviting me. It's been a real honor to talk with you, and I look forward to working with you on some of these projects. I would love to try to help